is just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Seray Cicek. She is a medical technology innovator and synthetic biology enthusiast. She holds a master's in science and pharmaceutical sciences and a bachelor in science and engineering science, biomedical from the University of Toronto. Her strong interest in synthetic biology led her to pursue graduate study in Keith Pardee's lab. Her graduate studies focus on development of low-cost diagnostic device for the detection of the Zika virus in patient samples and deployment of these devices in Ecuador, Colombia, and Brazil. Seray is the co-founder and CEO of LSK Technologies, Inc., a startup that aims to decentralize diagnostic labs to increase access to traditional lab-based tests, starting from COVID-19 testing. My gosh, she didn't know who I am from Adam. I asked her to come on the show because I posted one of her news things on the COVID-19 antibody thread on Dental Town. And my gosh, I mean, I saw this come across the news. Basically, the news came from, it actually came from University of Toronto Dental School. So I want to give them all the credit for this machine. But anyway, the news article from the University of Toronto Dental School, I'm on their email list, said that she's bringing diagnostic capacity to the doctor's office to fundamentally change how we respond to global pandemics with a decentralized model the size of a toaster that will help keep the world healthy and protected. With a pop-up lab capacity to virtually any setting, LSK Technologies creates your lab in a box. Her product is Plum, is a low-cost, high-throughput, and portable diagnostic device that can test for COVID-19 and hundreds of other diseases. I was going to have her, I was going to buy one just to test to see if I had male pattern baldness. I've always wondered if I'm going to get that when I grow up. This is a University of Toronto spinoff from Keith Pardee Lab, portable diagnostic devices built by UT startup. Anyway, the bottom line is we're in the middle of a pandemic. I can tell you have more brains in your finger than I have from my nose to my toes. My God, how did you get this smart so young? And do you envision a day someday where there's 2 million dentists on Earth? There's 150,000 general dentists in the United States, 30,000 specialists. Do you see a day coming soon where all those dentists will have their own lab inside the dental office testing for viruses?
Yeah, right now we are going through this realization that our centralized testing system is not working. We thought it was working till the gaps in it was highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the best way to address this is to put a lab wherever possible, and dentists are everywhere. And when we look at the current pandemic, dentists are the biggest group that is directly affected by this highly infectious disease that is transmitted by aerosols and droplets. So yeah, why not? Now we know that we can change this if we were able to put diagnostic devices into dentist offices.
So I notice, I try to, when patients say crazy stuff, it is what it is. I mean, if they say that it is, and they say things like, oh, these government authorities, first they told us we didn't need to wear a mask and not to wear a mask. Then they told us to wear a mask. Now they're saying if I don't wear a mask, it's illegal. Dentists are debating what you just said about aerosol to droplets. So the patients, I understand how at first you told them to go right and not wear a mask. And if you wanted a mask, you were being a selfish brat because someone in a hospital really needed a mask. And then it's 30 days later, oh, forget everything I said. Now you need it. So I understand that, but when I see dentists arguing about aerosol versus droplet, well, you're the brain. You're the smartest person on this podcast right now. Is it an aerosol or a droplet?
So we are learning more and more about this disease as we go on. That's why at the beginning, first it started as something like a flu. Then it became not so like a flu. And then as we go on, first we know that it's first passed through droplets. But through the droplets, as they dry up in the air, aerosols can be also facilitating this transmission. So it's safe to say that we should protect ourselves against both. Given that I'm not a medical doctor or I'm not an expert in this area, but all I know is that if we put a mask, our chances of getting this transmission is lowered. So it's best to do that in closed spaces where we are, it's harder to avoid each other in close proximity.
So you hold a master's degree in pharmaceutical science and a Bachelor of Science in Engineering Science, biomedical firm from the University of Toronto. I know that nobody can predict the future. If you could, I would take you to a casino or the Wall Street, and we'd have make some money. But no one can predict the future. But it is July 14th. I'm here in Arizona. You're in Toronto. What do you think's going to happen for just the rest of 2020? Do you think this virus is slowly fading away and going down, or do you still think it's going up? Some people say it's going up in cases, but it's going down in deaths. I mean, I'm a dentist. I want to pull your wisdom teeth. I don't know any of that. Where do you think it's going for the rest of the year?
So my personal opinion is that places where there is no controls that are obeyed, unfortunately, cases are going to go up, and we are seeing in Florida and Miami. But the more unknown case will be during the fall when we start having flu, because we know the COVID-19 and flu at the beginning they seem quite alike. So during that fall, there will be a great confusion in terms of whether this is flu or whether this is COVID-19. I don't know. What do I do? Do I quarantine? Do I not quarantine? So there will be an area where things will be unknown. But past that, so past 2021 winter, I do believe that things are going to go back to normal. Because one thing that we learned from 1918 pandemic is that if a virus is too dangerous and starts killing its host, it won't be able to survive further. So I do believe that over time it will taper away and it will go away. But unfortunately, there will be a lot of confusion, especially when the flu starts circulating among us.
So you started out with the Zika virus. I mean, I'm not to be rude, but when you see a pretty young lady, what made a pretty young girl interested in hunting down the deadliest viruses in Ecuador, Colombia, and Brazil? I mean, how do you go from I want to go to the wild jungles and find deadly viruses?
So how it happened is that, as we know, the Zika virus was an outbreak in 2015, 2016. At the time, I met my professor, Keith Pardee, who was working on developing low-cost diagnostics. And for me, it was really important to be working on something that can have a direct impact on today's world. So that Zika was the beginning of everything for us. And through the project that he had gotten, I saw that my skill set would be able to address the need, and we started working together. And the next thing I know was within a year, we did our first prototype and sent those prototypes to Ecuador, Brazil, and Colombia. And that experience taught us a lot. And actually, at the time, Zika was an important outbreak because it would cause microcephaly, meaning that if you were pregnant and you get the virus, your baby would have developmental disorders. And there was a huge scare in terms of it being transmitted to US. So thank God it wasn't an airborne disease, because we could have been in a totally different world, a totally different scenario. But yeah, so that's how it all started for me.
Well, you know what's funny is for me, I graduated from dental school in '87, so this is my second virus rodeo. When we were in dental school, when I graduated from high school in 1980, that was the initiation of the HIV virus, or the HIV. So we lived through all that. But I remember in dental school them always saying, could you imagine if HIV would have been an airborne virus, And that virus went on to kill 30, 40 million people. And now this time it's an airborne virus. The Zika virus you're talking about, that was mosquito-borne, right?
Yeah, it was a mosquito-borne virus. And thank God it was mosquito, not air.
And mosquitoes have killed more humans than anybody else. I mean, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've read that mosquitoes have killed half of all the humans that ever lived.
Yes, mosquitoes cause malaria and other related diseases that cause people to die. But in a sense that you can isolate mosquitoes, you can kill them, but it's really hard to kill something that you cannot see, and that's the problem we are facing with COVID-19 right now.
Wow. So, this coronavirus? I mean, I think they discovered it in the '60s. I mean, it's really not ever going to go away, is it? I mean, the
No,
COVID.
so it will circulate around just like any other diseases. So, for example, Zika virus, it wasn't the first time it happened. It was circulating around. It wasn't as pathogenic as it was before. So that's why it was around, but didn't really affect us or didn't really bother us. But then through the mutations that happened while it's passed on to different hosts or different person to person, this mutations causes virus to be more infectious and deadly, and that's why we become off guard and cannot develop easy therapeutics that targets it right away.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that mosquitoes kill more humans than humans murder humans. I mean, the mosquito is the deadliest animal in the world. Crazy. So where do you think how long do you think it'll be before I have a what do you call it, a lab in a box? Uh, and would this be like pricking a finger for blood for insulin, or would it be saliva or a
So,
nasal swab?
so right now we can do two tests. One is nasal swab to detect the virus itself, and the finger prick test can do the detection of antibodies against it. Originally, we are targeting hospitals so that we can give our device as soon as possible to those settings. And after that, we will be targeting point of care doctors' offices. Right now, our devices can be used for research use only and for environmental purposes. But for regulatory approval, we are looking for another about 4 months to get there. But through that, we are doing our best to get the test validated, having our sensitivity and specificity at the levels that can be used by other people.
I created a lot of controversy. I think yesterday morning, Mississippi, over the news deal. I'm on all these email alerts or whatever. But anyway, it said Mississippi dentists must delay non-emergency or routine dental procedures. So I posted that on Dental Town. Turns out that they were very vague in their press release. It said Mississippi dentists must delay non-emergency or routine dental procedures and that require hospitalization.
I see.
And I had three sources, and they all three left out that require hospitalization. So when I post that, all dentists in Mississippi are like, "What?" But you said you're targeting hospitals first. What and is that just because that's the war zone, and then a dental office for non-emergency routine would be later, or what is the thinking behind the hospital? Because that's where you need to know right now the fastest.
Yeah, so right now we are a new startup, and the best thing we can do is get our devices available to customers as soon as possible, and we think that we can achieve that within 4 months. But after that, the next step will be the doctor's offices. And the main reason we are thinking about hospitals is that there's a hospital everywhere that somebody can access to and be tested before they go to a dentist. On the other side, this is all about depending on the regulatory approval and regulatory use. For dentist applications, there can be other avenues such as checking whether your surfaces are clean, whether you're providing it in a safe environment, and those kind of uses can be used by other device too.
You mean so you could be like testing the counter to see if the counter?
Yeah, because it's one of the reasons that we are kind of fighting the unknown is that COVID-19 is spread by asymptomatic patients too. And that means like somebody like me who is perfectly fine can be super spreader. So it's hard to test those people because if I'm feeling fine, why would I go to get tested? One of the ways to do that is that to see if your space is clean. If somebody who had come in and had affected your equipment or affected your surfaces, you can see if your cleaning purposes or cleaning procedures are there in place. So that's one thing, one of the implementations that people can do to make sure that their dentist is safe for themselves and that others. But of course, that doesn't mean that you diagnose other people.
So, where I posted that on Dental Town, people are saying, asking, what are you testing for? Are you testing for the actual virus? Are you testing for a T cell mediated antibody to it? What are you actually testing for?
So our original target is the virus itself. So we detect the RNA inside the virus by using a technique called RT-LAMP. And the second aspect that will be largely focused on hospitals would be the testing the antibody for it. So the antibody that your body develops against the virus. That is not a conclusive test in terms of whether you have the virus or not, the second one, but it gives you an idea about whether you had the virus or not. So just answering past questions that were in your mind.
Yeah. It's kind of really fun because it's all new. I mean, it's hard to be an expert on something that hasn't happened yet. You know what I mean? And you always watch it with stock markets. When you're my age, I graduated from high school. That was the biggest stock market crash, 21% interest rates. It was crazy. Then it crashed 87. Then it was March of 2000. Then it was Lehman Days. So I've lived through 4 plummets. And the one thing they all have in common is all the experts were telling you why it was so good. And then the next day it plummets. And then they repackage themselves and come back and have a news story. But the bottom line is humans just don't know a whole lot about that. I heard one guy, is this true or not? I heard one guy say that if the average Homo sapien human being was the size of the earth, that this virus, coronavirus, would be the size of a chicken. And I thought, okay, that's a good story in a kindergarten class, but is that actually true?
I don't know the size comparisons, but coronavirus is really, really small. That's why it's really hard to contain it with a non-medical masks. And even for that, you need really small filters to be able to catch them, unfortunately.
So you in your life, you've lived in 2 countries, just 2, Turkey and Canada?
Yeah.
And I always thought of Canada. I mean, when you were born in the United States, Canada is kind of like the smart couple that lives up in the loft, and they look down on you. The 5 drunk guys playing a poker game. They're kind of your parents up in the loft. But we only know how strong we are by what we're tested against, and it seems like some things have tested America, and we did really well. But it seems like this virus tested America, and we just flat out failed. What do you think when this passes? What do you think going back to the drawing board and getting back to? I mean, America's taken a knee. I mean, we've lost 130,000 people. That's how many Americans died during World War I. So we've had a world war, and I prefer a world war against a virus than another human being. The only thing I miss about actually going to war, like in the 70s and 80s, it seems like they made a lot better music. It seems like when humans were fighting humans, rock music was just better. I've noticed now that we're fighting a world war against a virus, the music hasn't done anything. It's still pretty lame music. I'm still waiting for the coronavirus rock music to come out and rock my world. But how do you think we're going to have to rebuild for the next generation? Your tool, more testing on site, but what are we going to have to go back and redo differently so that so that 120,000 people don't die from an airborne virus?
Yeah, so something we need to do better is to communicate what's happening. So at the beginning, like for example, with Zika, it was a problem that was in Latin America. It didn't really bother us, but it could have bothered us, and that's what happened with COVID-19. So we really need to share information better. And the other thing is that we all know that this virus came through travel. And we did know that SARS virus in the past had caused a small outbreaks in different locations that were deadly. So my question is, why did not we monitor for the SARS virus in the past with monthly checks. If we could have catched it in the airport, if we could have quarantined those people, maybe we weren't going to be here in this situation where we're stuck in our houses, afraid to go outside. So what I'm trying to get at is that we need to do more testing, and we need to do more regular testing for things that we just don't know yet, right? If we catch those viruses in the early on, then the cost is less, the efficacy is much better. For example, we see the countries who had quarantined early on had a better success of flattening down the curve versus others who chose to not do so.
But when you say those countries that did it first, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like those are the ones that this is their second rodeo. I mean, this is America's first rodeo with SARS, but it seems like where they saw it like back in 2012 or whenever, it seems like that's what they did. They've already seen it before, so they had a lot of time to adapt. Would you say that? And then the countries seen it for the first time failed?
Yes and no. So it also depends to what extent you went through it. So, for example, in Canada, there were different provinces who had different policies. For example, there was one province who had their hospital system set up so that if there's a first patient, everybody else knows, and they're geared towards that to tackle this, fight this infection. Versus others who didn't learn from the past mistakes struggled further. And the other thing is that I would say the world had their rodeo with the 1918 influenza pandemic, but unfortunately, we forget really easily that things like this that we don't see can affect our lives really drastically.
So do you know what Mexico and Canada have in common?
What is it?
They both border on stupidity. Do you think there's what do you think the chances that this will be as bad as the the Spanish influenza?
I think we're going towards that, unfortunately. But we do have better gear. We do have technology that can tell us in advance. But unfortunately, what is not for us is that we have a bigger population, more connected, and that is unfortunately working against us. But that being said, I think moving forward, there will be more technologies coming out that will prevent this from happening again to some extent.
Do you think we'll ever go back to the time when you were a little girl playing at the park with no mask and gloves and not washing your hands? Or do you think that the rest of your life you're going to be wearing masks and gloves? And was this a permanent game changer, or is this just temporary?
I think it's temporary because just like 1918 pandemic, it was there for a period, a year or two, then it was gone. And I think this will be the similar situation. We just need to get through it. But one thing that we will learn is that now we will be washing our hands more often. We will be paying more attention to our hygiene. And in cases of, I do believe that the use of masks will kind of linger. And other practices that, such as working from home, will be around here.
A lot of people say that that it's not so much the virus, it's your immune system, and they're saying, well, look, it's the old people in the hospitals that are dying most. I mean, I've read stuff that sometimes they can say a third of the people who died from this in America alone lived in nursing homes, but then a third were in meat packing plants. But then we see the Kawasaki case with the little kids. And you're probably too young to have a kid. You're not married or have a kid, do you? But okay, so pretend I have 4 boys who turned into 6 grandchildren. And so I got 4 boys, so I got 4 daughter-in-laws, and there's a debate among them about kids going back to school in the fall. This is your expertise. Would you send your kids back to school in the fall if you lived in Arizona, Texas, or Florida?
I would be cautious about it. Like, I prefer not to. Because again, as I mentioned, like I'm not an expert, but this is my personal opinion. There will be a confusion during the fall with the flu coming, and I would rather not take the risk of sending my kid. And to be honest, my main worry would not be that my kid getting sick. If my kid is healthy and doesn't have a immune compromised past, it would be more so the kid spreading the disease around. Because we know adults, they're having hard time social distancing, let alone kids. It will be really hard to do that. So I feel like it's just more of the spread will be a issue. But that being said, if the school is taking the precautions, doing cleaning checks, proving that their school is clean and the kids are separated properly, then they can go to school. But again, this is up to the people who have kids.
I always found it very interesting. Let me find my stat on that, but yeah, I don't know where I put it, but it's something like 85% of all the humans live in the Western Hemisphere, not in in the Eastern Hemisphere, not in the Americas. So America is only like 13% of the people. But then when you by the equator, it's like 85% live in the northern equator too. And they say the coronavirus has a very different behavior in the northern equator than it does on the living on the equator. So is that part of your thinking about the fall could be bad, is because the coronavirus historically has acted more aggressive in the winters, or?
More so, what I'm trying to refer to is the flu coming, and the flu and coronavirus at the beginning having similar symptoms. I do not. So the problem with the coronavirus is that in a study they were found that there were 3 different strains circulating. So it's really hard to say whether this strain is a good strain or deadly strain. And some strains affect less, so people have a more lighter symptom. So it's really hard to say what will happen, but my comment was more so regarding that flu coming up, and with not enough testing done, the confusion that comes with it will create some environment that people will be more confused.
But you do you think the coronavirus acts will be a lot different? I mean, in the winter than the summer. I mean, we're here in Arizona, and they're trying to tell us all in Arizona that as much as it's spreading now, they're saying it will spread worse in the summer. Do you believe that? I mean, in the winter.
Worse in the winter. Well, I cannot say much about it because it's hard. This is a virus that we haven't really seen before, and it had already changed most of our assumptions from droplets to aerosols to masks. It's really hard to say that, but my personal opinion is that I think it'll wind down. It's not going to be as crazy as it was hit before.
That is these are just such strange times. So another thing, a lot of people that are very sad they're living through a pandemic. Again, I would much rather be living through this pandemic than World War I, World War II, the Civil War, the Vietnam War. And I would rather be killed by a virus than a human any day of the week. I think when humans are killing each other, it's so bad. It's so bad karma. It's just so horrible. I'd much rather be ran over by a snail than killed by a human. But it's changing everything, What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And I know a lot of old people like myself always said, there's too much government regulation. There's too much government regulation, blah, blah, blah. So then during the pandemic, they started laxing regulations, and then Lancet, where they used to have a slow process, peer review, we need to get this out today. And then they had to do some retraction. So everything, it's not right or wrong. It's what are your trade-offs? And when governments regulate, the trade-off is the quality's higher maybe, but it's slower. So right now, you're trying to make this machine in COVID-19. So where I'm coming at is, do you feel the government now is more lax and easy to get through the process? And do you feel like, oh, this is a good time to get something through the government because that they've had to take a knee from this pandemic, and if you just say COVID-19, they're going to let you through the door. And do you think that's a good thing overall, or do you think it's a bad thing?
So I think overall, given the situation, it is a good thing because if right now what we know is that we need more testing. And if we have high barriers to get devices to the system, we know we won't get the testing that we need done. So that's why overall I think it's a good thing. But that being said, the government regulators, both in Canada and US, they still have some rules that you need to follow. You need to demonstrate that your test is working. And after that, they do some follow-up. That's why there were some tests that were unfortunately recalled in both countries. But that's showing you that, yes, there's speed there, but there's also control to make sure that these tests are delivering the statements that they're delivering. And one important thing that I think we realize is that by doing more testing, we realize the asymptomatic people are actually one of the large group of transmitters. So that's why it's important to get some tests out there. What is really important is that you do what you claim in your test. So if you claim that your test has a certain percent of accuracy, you need to demonstrate that it has that accuracy. And that is important. But overall, I do agree with the regulation because otherwise it becomes Wild West where everybody is putting a device out there and you don't know if it's working, you don't know if it's reliable. That creates a further confusion and further chaos than it helps. So that's why I'm generally more pro-regulation, but I think every government who did emergency authorization did a right job addressing this.
Yeah, I finally found that stat I was looking for, but it's just crazy. I mean, and this is why I the greatest gift I gave myself, August 4th, will be my 30-year anniversary of lecturing. And when I gave my first dental lecture, I was I don't know, I was 27 years old, and I had no idea that the consequence of that would mean that 30 years later, I've lectured in 50 countries. And I found that to be the most educating thing that ever happened to me in my life. I mean, and my 4 boys agree, but I mean, just little things like this deal. I mean, this made sense to me because I saw it. Did you know that almost 90% of the world's population lives in the northern hemisphere? I mean, that's just, why do you think humans are 1 million years old? Why do you think 90% of them picked the northern half than the summer half? I'm thinking my ancestors knew if they went to the southern hemisphere, they'd just fall off the earth into outer space. Why do you think 90%? Because the other theory might be, do you think it was an even distribution and the southern hemisphere had a Zika virus and Ebola virus and erased them all? Do you think that's what we're looking at, or do you just think they all went north?
I think it's just historically they settled in the north areas, that those were the areas that were connected and discovered. And later on, the southern hemisphere was more explored. And especially, we know the US was discovered later, and then southern hemisphere was discovered, South America was discovered later. So I think it's all historical. Other than that, I don't see any relation. It's just those countries who are settled in the northern hemisphere end up being more wealthier, having a greater populations.
Yeah, and the other, okay, so we're on that with the technology. What infectious disease trends are you seeing now in the middle of the pandemic?
Unfortunately, we hear more and more new infectious diseases. So, for example, in Democratic Republic of Congo right now, there's an Ebola crisis going on too. And when you look at the map of infectious diseases popping up, like Zika, Ebola, SARS, there is more and more coming up, and the trend seems to go up. So what this suggests is that we will just discover either existing virus in a new version or newer types of viruses. Unfortunately, the future is we need to test more and test different diseases.
See, that's where I actually got my theory. When I was lecturing, I love Africa. I mean, just love it. And I think the oldest boy is married anyway. Me and the three of the 4 boys were there. And you know that where the major river empties into the ocean, whether it's Cairo, whatever, Louisiana, that's a big civilization. And I've been to Africa a lot of times, and one time I was looking at the map and I realized, oh my God, that's a major, major river, and there ain't no big city down there. And was it the Zambezi River or the Limpano River? It was one of those rivers, but that was always, so I'll get off that because it's starting to sound like a conspiracy there. But I always thought if 90% of the humans live in the northern hemisphere, what happened in the south? And then when I looked at the south and saw, here's the largest continent on earth, Africa, and here's a major river emptying into the ocean, and there should be like a New Orleans there, or, there should be some big old city there. Should be a Cairo, Egypt sitting right here, and there's not. And I'm like, that was my red flag. One of the litmus tests that I always tell the dentist, I said, when I remember when AIDS came out. I mean, again, I'm living through this second virus. The same arguments, people were afraid to catch it by shaking your hand. People would go to a restaurant and drink out of a cup, and some people thought that cup should be thrown away or sterilized or autoclaved. And when they found out it was just going to go through a dishwasher, they were panicking. And, it took them a long time to realize this is a sexually transmitted disease. You're not going to catch this from signing the UPS driver, all this kind of stuff. And so I always tell these people, I say, when you're trying to set up your infection control, are you still going to be doing this after the pandemic? You know what I mean? You're in the middle of a pandemic. And they ask things that you never would have asked them before. Like before, if you got sick and you recovered, you were immune from the chicken pox, the measles, the mumps, rubella, all this stuff. Now they're all like, oh, well, you can get this one, in just 3 more months, you can get it again. It's like, okay, well, I never heard. I lived 58 years before I heard about this new virus. So I don't want to throw everything I learned in 58 years out the window while everybody's panicking. And some people, so the real world questions that we're hearing from patients are, okay, my son got the coronavirus. He had to go home. He quarantined for 14 days. Can he come over and visit now, or is that a bad idea? Because they're thinking, well, he already had it, so he's immune to it. He can't get it again. And if he's got antibodies to it, he wouldn't have these things floating out, going into you. So how do you see it being, you live in the micro world?
Yeah. As long as your son is tested negative for a duration of, I think it was 3 days, then that means he's not likely going to transmit it to you because he's not a spreader anymore. So it should be fine in general. But then again, there's so many unknowns with this. And who knows, maybe like all of us already got it to some extent, but we just don't know about it. That being said, I think after the test had been negative, I think it's safe to say that the patient is not spreading the virus. So that's the most important thing, right? The spreading the virus, that's how you would get affected. And even then, it's always good to keep some distance. I know we all like to hug each other, but keeping that distance to have that peace of mind is better than regretting later.
So what would you tell the dentist? Okay, so when I started dental school, when I started college in 1980, I didn't know any dentists that wore gloves. Gloves came after HIV. And then they made us get rid of the cuspidor where you'd sit up and spit in the bowl. And they're like, well, we're going to get rid of that little mini toilet deal and just suck it out. Lots of things. But now they're starting, because of this, now they're talking about negative air pressure rooms. They're talking about UV lights on the ceiling that kill airborne particles. They're talking about, of all the things they're talking about, what goes in your mind and think, that's silly? And what goes in your mind and think, yeah, that's a good idea? Do you think they should have UV lights, negative air pressure, fan? What would you advise to dentists in dental offices?
I think personally, I'm not a big fan of UV lights because they are only affected at a certain distance. But there will be more air circulation. So I think one of the biggest innovations that we are seeing is that air ventilation and air conditioning systems. So that will be the one thing that's changing. And negative pressure will only contain the people inside. But if you're having different people going in and out, that's not going to be affected either. So I think two areas that I can see. One is better improved air ventilation so that airborne particles are not transmitted. And the second thing I see is that dentists will be playing a part in terms of diagnostic testing in the future. I don't know when exactly this will happen, but I think this will happen. And there's a saying, in Chinese, the word crisis also means a chaos and also opportunity. So this might be the opportunity for dentists where they are now have another source of income. Who knows?
Yeah. So what is you're awfully young. If you do this company for 10, 20, 30 years, do you think you'll also be checking for other things in dental office? Like maybe for P. gingivalis, they have gum disease or any, because here's the one thing I got to tell the kids. I graduated from dental school thinking that Streptococcus mutans cause dental disease, dental cavities, and P. gingivalis cause gum disease. Well, ever since I graduated from school, they've been discovering a new species growing in the mouth about 3 or 4 times a year. So we've gone from Streptococcus mutans causes dental decay to now there's like 400 to 600 people in the zoo. You know what I mean? In fact, I was reading a study the other day where at 4 millimeters deep in a cavity, they can't even isolate Streptococcus mutans. So, it's kind of like how many species do you think could even be living inside the human's mouth or inside the whole human body?
Well, our human mouth is actually full of bacteria. Not all of them are harmful, but the harmful ones are the ones that cause infections and disease. And those are the ones that we need to be monitoring in terms of what are the early signs? How can we prevent this infection so it doesn't cause a bigger cavity that will be impossible to treat later? So that is a possibility.
So what is your first test right now is for coronavirus, mm-hmm. and you're going to go in hospital. Is that your first? Is that your first test?
Yeah.
And what do you think would be your second test?
Our ultimate goal is panel test so that you can detect COVID-19, flu, strep, all other related diseases and symptoms. And again, as I mentioned, where we want to be is that we will monitor all these naughty infectious diseases before they create outbreaks. That's really where we want to be as a company, to be able to say, here's the red flag, and you need to watch out for this.
When I first met you and talked to you, you keep saying that, how you want to make an impact. Where does this come from in your heart and soul? Does this come from your mom, your aunt, your religion? Where does this come from? Where this ambitious drive to make an impact?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I guess the idea is that my parents are doctors, so I do believe that they're making a huge impact in everybody that they touch to. But I do see that in today's world, when I see a gap that I can address, I would do my best to change that. And that's where I like doing the impact. I guess it comes from the drive of improving and creating a world that I want to live in.
That's a beautiful thing. So your mom and dad are both doctors?
Yeah.
Both physicians? What kind of physicians or what kind of doctors?
My dad is OBGYN and my mom is a respiratory specialist. So she was on the front lines of COVID-19 when it first came out. So I did learn a lot about COVID-19 and how it impacts life through her.
It's kind of interesting because when I was little, all the OBGYNs were men like your dad. And now you go into graduating school as OBGYN, it's almost all women. And now I'm starting to see that in pediatric dentistry. Again, when they started out 30 years ago, all the pediatric dentists were men. And now when I'm in a dental school, if they got 6 grad students in pediatric dentistry, 5 of them are women. Women are really changing. Does your mom and your your mom and dad, does your mom say that when she became a doctor, it was really a man's world? And would you say now it's 50-50 from what you saw at the
Um,
University of Toronto, or have we come a
she
long way in that?
she didn't really comment on that, but what like my personal opinion is that we are making progress. There's more women in engineering. There's more women in dentistry. There's more women in doctor as a doctor. We are definitely making a progress. And again, if you use both of the genders, you get most benefit out of it, and you can address problems faster and easier. But definitely, she is one of the early doctors in terms of being female. But one of the other things that I want to point out is that in Turkey, we actually have quite a bit of women in STEM sciences, and whether that comes historically or whether that comes through how the Republic of Turkey was founded, where both men and women fought side by side. But I do see that this is happening more and more worldwide.
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that I think Istanbul, which used to be Constantinople, I mean, if that's not the coolest country you've ever seen, and for all you folks living in the Midwest, where the oldest thing in your whole state is 100 years old. I mean, my gosh, I couldn't believe it. My first trip out of America was to Lisbon, Portugal, and this person was telling me something. It was like they said it's like 1,000 years old, and I'm like, what? What did you say? Did you say 1,000? And I mean the history, the walk through time. It's just so cool how that came. But yeah, I noticed some countries like Poland. I mean, it was like so many. The first time I lectured there, way back in the '80s, and I was like, the whole room was half women, and just different countries tried this stuff differently. But Toronto always seemed like it was kind of more 50-50, men women.
Depends on where you are. For example, in engineering, there is still more progress to be done, but we're close to getting there.
So, do you think there's any stereotypes that are true? I mean, do you think some stereotypes like women like being a physician more than an engineer, or that men like geometry more than algebra? Do you see any stereotypes in college students where, I mean,
I think it depends like where you're coming from and how you're raised more in general. But yeah, stereotypes do exist to some extent, but they're not everything. There are women out there who are like me, who are interested in building things and being part of the engineering. It all becomes how you are led to, what your experience as a child brings you up to. But when given the chance, I do know that women have the capacity and interest to be part of the STEM.
I want to my mother always told me something good comes out of everything, and this Saturday she turns 82. Happy birthday, mommy. But I think when something really bad happens, my mom always says, well, it's a great learning chance. I mean, she'd always say, well, you can't make a mistake it can't be bad if you learn something, because it's a lesson. And so I think whenever something really big happens, like a pandemic, you have the opportunity to learn a whole lot. And one of the things that one of my pet peeves, I remember that when the first time I heard about what's the adult vaccine for the chicken pox, and it comes back,
Yeah.
shingles. And I walked into Walgreens, and I said, this is a long time ago. It was like 5-10 years ago. And I said, yeah, I'd like to get the shingles vaccine. They say, well, you need a doctor's prescription. I said, well, I am a doctor. I'm a doctor of dental surgery. I'm a dentist. They said, no, another doctor. And I swear to God, I mean, that made me so mad at the government. I mean, like they just passed a law yesterday that I don't want to get controversial about birth control, but the big national chain of pharmacies said that you no longer need a prescription for birth control and things like that. Well, as an American, I know Americans are a little entitled, spoiled brats, but I mean, I don't think I should have to have permission from a government authority to get a vaccine or to get a test or things like that. And what I love most about you is like, and in Arizona, it finally happened. I complained loudly for 30 years, and that's how long it took. I mean, every time they'd write me a fun writing letter, I'd write them a check for $100 just so they'd read it. And then I give them my laundry list of everything I didn't like about him. And I just said, it's totally un-American that for me to go get something, I have to get a permission slip. And the other thing, coming from Kansas, is like I can't go to the store and buy penicillin. But if I was going to buy it for my cows, chicken, or sheep, I could buy a 50-pound bag of it. So I can buy 50 pounds for horses, cats, and chickens, but I can't buy one pill for me. So my question to you was, do you think this is, when you do this laboratory testing in Arizona, like if you would have grown up in Arizona just 1 year ago, if you would have said, I want to get I want to get tested, see if I'm pregnant. I want to check my liver enzymes. If you want to do any self-testing, oh, no. Not you. You can't. You got to go to the doctor and pay your toll and get your proper. It's all about money, shakedown control. But do you think after this pandemic and new technology, like you have a lab in a box, do you think that like my grandkids will grow up and they might just go over to a friend's house and have all a physical and blood test and all? Do you think it's going to be more democratized for the individual as opposed to institutionalized by the government?
I think that's where we are going with these things, because that's one of the areas COVID-19 highlighted, right? If we were able to decentralize that, more democratize that, we would be able to address this in a faster pace, in a point at the point that is happening. I think that's where things are eventually getting there. And again, as you mentioned, the coronavirus became the opportunity that now these agencies are more open to testing different people and things like that.
Well, talk about yourself more. I mean, I've watched your YouTube videos. You've won awards. I mean, you and, my gosh, I mean, I could have introduced you for an hour and a half. 5 early stage startups take home a total of $300,000 as Velocity unveils its second pre-seed investment fund from the Velocity incubator. I mean, man, you are hitting it out of the ballpark. My gosh. So what's next for you? COVID-19, MERS, SARS. What's next for you?
For us, the next is, again, as I said, getting these devices to the doctor's hands, getting these devices to users who need it, like dentists. So that's what we are going to work towards. And for example, getting specialty testing. If you want to, in the future, like travel down to Latin America to enjoy a good summer vacation, and you happen to be an area where you might be infected with dengue, Zika, or yellow fever, you might want to know that, and you might want to get tested for that. And that testing should be affordable and available for you. So that's where we are going towards, for you to get checked for infectious diseases so that you know what you have and you can get treatment according to that.
I gotta tell you something about the old world. When I was in college at Creighton University in 1980, if I would have went to the dean and told him, I need some venture capital money because I got a business idea, and why don't you give me some money in a classroom, he would have looked at me like I was drinking or something. I mean, everything you're doing just didn't exist 40 years ago in a university. What was University of Toronto thinking when all of a sudden they decided they're going to start incubating small startups inside their university? I don't know. They might have been drinking. Was this after a night of beer?
I think what universities realize is that the way problems are solved, the way new jobs are created, are actually through the startups who grow and who bring new skill set to the market, solve the problems of the real world. And the best way to achieve that is to provide an environment that these startups can grow. Unfortunately, the entry to startup is quite hard. Like it's a tough road that you need to battle with different challenges and overcome that. And if you can make the start easier, it becomes easier to get through this. And there are more and more incubators in different places. There are accelerators very well known in US that facilitate those fundings. I think in the past, these did exist, but they were not widely accessible or well known. So they were in a certain spot that you had to be physically there. Now they're everywhere, and with the internet, we can communicate to each other and learn from different parts of the world, whether this is an accelerator, whether this is an investment fund. And I think the other thing is that now adults are believing in young people to build companies, and that's the most important part.
So explain your product. It's your lab in a box. It's called Plum, a high throughput analyzer that can test for COVID-19 and hundreds of others. Where's the word plum come from? Was that just your favorite fruit when you were a little girl?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the original test that we were reading had a color change that turned purple. And so the plum started from that, where the other products around, or you would hear electronics, were all fruit vegetable based. So we end up with plum. And our device is portable and low cost, and it can be used by anyone, and it's a multi-mode device. So that's how we came up with the acronym Plum at the end. But we came with the name first and then found something to do. So the way it works is that after a minimal sample handling, you put your cartridge into the device, and the device conducts the test within half an hour to an hour, depending on the test that you're reading. And the results are displayed to you with a display. And those results can be shared online worldwide. So ultimately, this is our original device. We are going to be designing a cartridge that enables anybody who doesn't need to handle minimum liquid to be able to use these devices at the point of care locations. And our advantage is that we have a multi-mode analysis system that enables us to detect different reactions at the same time, or conduct multiple reactions at the same time. So this pretty much, with the test kits and the device, you can drive up to a community, screen them, give them the results right away, and leave the community. So you can think of our device as enabling testing wherever you can go.
Okay, well, I just wrote your next marketing piece. I don't know if they had this nursery. Remember when I was little, they had that nursery rhyme, Little Jack Horner sat in a quarter eating his Christmas pie. He stuck in a thumb and pulled out a plum and said, "What a good boy am I." Have you heard that one?
No.
So now we got to change it. Little Seray Cicek sat in a corner eating her Christmas pie. She stuck in a thumb and pulled out a plum and said, "What a good girl am I." I think you should little Jack Horner. When the minute you said plum, when I first saw plum, I didn't think of purple. I thought of little Jack Horner sat in a corner eating his Christmas pie. So you might look at that. So last but not least, last question. So what is the Pardee lab, and how is? I mean, I see a triangle. I see University of Toronto, LSK Technologies, Pardee Lab. Are those three different names of the same building at the University of Toronto, or are those three separate things? Or go connect the dots.
Yeah, so the Pardee Lab, Professor Dr. Keith Pardee is our supervisor that we developed the device while I was doing my master's. So Pardee Lab is a laboratory located at Leslie Down Faculty of Pharmacy at University of Toronto. I was with my co-founder Livia Guo. I was a researcher there during my master's, and that's when and where we developed the device. So Keith Pardee is also part of our company as well, and we are working towards commercializing the device.
Wow. And how much does that Plum machine cost?
So right now it's hard to say because we're still finalizing the details, but we are expecting it to be around $10,000 for diagnostic use.
Yeah, and I'm just going to leave it on that. I think if an American wonders, do I have diabetes? Am I pregnant? Do I have liver? I mean, my gosh, I just do not understand how, with freedom, if you have a test and I have money, then that's between me and you. I don't know. I don't. When you study 5,000 years of human history, I just think that people that control the country haven't proven to me that they're wiser than the individual. I mean, I think they've made some horrendous mistakes, and I just don't get it, especially when you can explain the whole thing. Here's my red flag. If you're wondering if it's right or wrong, usually if money's the answer, what's the question? And there's more things done for money than there is doing it for the right reason. And if you're doing it for, so when you're telling me why I can't do this and you're the government, and the only thing I can see is because someone else is going to make more money, then that's my red flag.
Yeah, I think if we have these tests available, the cost will definitely go down, right? And knowing what you have will not hurt anyone unless you are an extra burden to the healthcare system, which I don't think that would be happening if you're paying for the test.
And I also, just one parting comment, there were a lot of, sometimes things look differently with money. Like, for a while, the narrative they were trying to start was, hey, we're not gonna go bankrupt to save grandma, right? When they're just clearing out the nursing homes, let them go. But I don't know. When I look at grandkids, most of them, the most important person in their whole life is their nana, their grandma. And I just can't see one 6-year-old kid saying, oh, yeah, let grandma die if I can have an extra Nintendo or have a better stock portfolio. I mean, almost every kid under 10 I know would give up all their toys and privileges to keep their nana alive for another year. So there's always a big disconnect between what government people say. I'll give you another example. You always hear the government saying that we spend too much money on healthcare. And then anytime I meet a person, say I meet someone holding their baby, and I say, well, your baby is going to die tonight. You're at the hospital seeking care, and your baby's going to die tonight. And I say, well, if you buy this little pill and your baby takes a pill, it won't die. How much money will you give me? Well, everything. She'll give me her house, her car, she'll give me everything. Well, I never hear anybody saying we spend too much on houses, too much on cars, too much on iPhones. It's always too much on healthcare. Yet when I go talk to the people, they give me everything they got not to have grandma die or themselves die, and especially not their baby die. Now, if it was grandpa, they'd say, yeah, just sell him off and make sausage out of him. But grandmas and babies, they'll give you their house and walk away. So why do you think governments always say we spend too much money on healthcare when the people never, ever say that?
I am not sure why that is the case. It depends on the country that you're living in. And there are some countries that make it more accessible so that you get access to the healthcare system. But I think it's easier to say, it's an easier to talk about healthcare. It's largely available, and there's so many players in it. Maybe that's why they are picking on that. But definitely, I think they realize that right now they need to spend more on healthcare. That's what is changing. Yeah.
Well, the only wealth is health. Because once you lay down to take your final dirt nap, it doesn't matter how many cars, houses, or how much money you have. And my gosh, if you don't have health, you have no wealth. Health is the only true wealth. I am so proud of everything you've done at such a young age, and you're just crushing it. And this is timely. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to dentists about this machine. And I cannot wait till I see the first dental office install a Plum.
I cannot wait to see either. Thank you for having me.
All right. You have a rocking hot day. And if there's ever some big update or you install your first one in a dental office or whatever, let me know and come back on the show.
Yep.
Okay. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.